I'm thrilled to be here at the fall conference. I brought my wife, Debbie, who's an immigrant from Venezuela. I think you know I'm an immigrant from India. Debbie, you want to say hi? She's in the back right there. If you watched Death of a Nation, she sings the Celtic woman song, "Oh America," in that movie. Well, ever since Trump's election, America has been an abnormal place. American politics is not the way it has been, and it's really not the way it should be. My own life sort of illustrates the peculiarity of these twists and turns. I came to the country in the very late 70s. I became a young Reaganite in the 80s. I was a convert to that infectious, contagious, and I would say whimsical conservatism that Reagan represented. Reagan was above the fray. He was genial. He was self-deprecating. I remember, this goes back to my college years now. In 1982, the country was in a deep recession, and Reagan was cornered by the sort of Jim Acosta of those days. This is a fellow named Sam Donaldson, who says to Reagan, he goes, "Mr. President, you have blamed the economists, and you have blamed the media, and you have blamed the Democratic Party. Does any of the blame belong to you?" And Reagan goes, "Well, yes, because for many years I used to be a Democrat." And I mention this because even Sam started laughing, and there was a kind of camaraderie between the two of them, and it was that kind of America in which political adversaries could get along. This is not the America we live in now. I had my own experiences with the Obama administration, which resulted in literally being locked up overnight for 8 months in a confinement center due to a campaign finance technicality that's not otherwise prosecuted. But happily for me this year, this summer, I kind of got my American dream back. I was in my office thumbing over some papers. The phone rang. It was the White House operator. "Is this Mr. D'Souza?" "Yes." "Hold a line for the President of the United States." Really glad I answered the phone. It's kind of hard to call back. So Trump comes on, and he is in a very Trumpian mood. He goes, "Hey, Dinesh, how's it going? I'm sitting here with John Kelly." He goes, "You know John Kelly, don't you?" I go, "No, I don't know John Kelly. I know who he is, but I don't know the guy." And it dawned on me as Trump was speaking, and I couldn't even really hear everything he said, because I realized that this was that moment in which I was going to receive a presidential pardon. And it wasn't just that it wiped out clean my record, and it wasn't just that I could vote again, own a firearm, and it wasn't just that I got my American dream back. I recognized the political significance, that this was a giant up yours to the Obama administration that was happening right then. It's that kind of politics we're in now, a politics in which, and you see this on the campus, very often if you are a critic, the other side sees you as an enemy. The other side wants to shut you up, shut you down, take you out. In my dealings with the Obama administration, it's really clear to me that if they could have locked me up for 20 years for this technicality, they would have been thrilled to do it. Why? Because to them, I was a dangerous, non-white immigrant making movies, exposing Obama, and they'd rather not have me around. Now, the question I want to talk about is, what does it mean to be a conservative in this environment, which is not the same as being a conservative in normal times? Years ago, I remember a conversation with William F. Buckley in which he raised this exact question, which is, how can you be a conservative in a liberal culture. See, normally the job of a conservative is to conserve, to kind of hold on to what's there. But if you are in a culture that is dominated by the left, let's just say a culture of intolerance, intimidation, threats, propaganda, one-sidedness, distortion, what do? Conserve that? No. No. So Buckley's point was, in that abnormal situation, you actually have to, in a certain way, stop being a conservative. Which means you have to be conservative philosophically, yes, but temperamentally, strategically, tactically, you have to think differently. You have to break with the mold. You have to actually depart from what conservatives have done in the past. And you have to find new ways, in this case, not to conserve the existing leftist superstructure or ecosystem, but to actually subvert it. So another way to put that is that you actually have to become something of a guerrilla, someone who knows how to overturn the apple cart. Why? In order to expand the parameters of discourse, allow real issues to be debated once again. Notice that since Trump's election, we haven't had a single substantive policy discussion on any issue. It's been racism, it's been fascism. Now, where my work comes in, and the reason I'm doing a fake history series this year for Young America's Foundation, is that it seems very clear to me that the political narratives that are being generated now are dependent or parasitic on deeper claims, claims that actually long predate Trump. So let's just take, for example, the idea Donald Trump is a fascist. The Republican Party is the party of fascism. We hear this, and yet it is dependent upon a hidden premise. And the hidden premise is that fascism is a phenomenon of the right. Think of it, if fascism were not on the right, it would make absolutely no sense to say that Trump is a fascist. So fascism has to be on the right in order for that claim to even be plausible. Now, the notion that fascism is on the right was cooked up after World War II. Prior to World War II, no one thought that. There are rare and isolated references to fascism being on the right prior to World War II, but in every case, the term right has nothing to do with any of us or even with America. You have to remember that these terms right and left are a little bit slippery. In the French Revolution, the people who supported the revolution sat on the left. And that's where we got the origin of the idea of the left. The people who opposed the revolution, which was the party of throne and altar, the party of aristocracy and the established church, sat on the right, and they were called the right. But of course, that has nothing to do with American conservatism. So the point I want to make is, after World War II, there was a redefinition of fascism. And I'll return to that in a minute. My broader point is that fake news depends on fake scholarship and fake history, these larger stories about ourselves and our country. And these stories put out by the left are really effective. They're so effective that our side sometimes comes to believe them. So, for example, consider the idea that the Democrats might historically have been the party of racism, but now the Republican Party is the party of racism. In other words, the parties swapped sides. This notion is, again, so influential that a chairman of the RNC, in fact, a former colleague of mine at the American Enterprise Institute, Ken Melman, was going around to the NAACP and black churches and apologizing for the racist history of the Republican Party, even though, in fact, the Republican Party has no racist history. So when I speak on campuses, I'm actually confronted with an interesting problem or conundrum. And the problem is, I am constantly confronted with students and professors who, in effect, their attitude is sort of, ha ha ha, Dinesh, don't you know that the two parties switch sides? Ha ha ha, Dinesh. And I'm thinking to myself, first of all, I am speaking with a complete ignoramus. And yet, this person knows something that is obviously not true. How do people, intelligent people, come to know things that are not in fact the case? How does, you may say, fake history get manufactured? Now the answer goes something like this. A professor in the 50s or 60s who realizes that American soldiers have gone into the concentration camps, have pulled out these starving, emaciated victims of Nazi tyranny. This guy actually knows that fascism was on the left. This guy actually knows that FDR and Mussolini admired each other. This guy actually knows that the Nazi newspapers were full of praise of the New Deal. He knows the whole thing. But he goes, wow, if future generations of young people knew this, the progressive movement, the Democratic Party, would be finished. So this has to be camouflaged. Here we have National Socialism. That's a big embarrassment because National Socialism right there says that socialism is a defining feature of Nazism and fascism. It's right there in the name. We have to sort of take the socialism out of National Socialism. We have to move fascism into the right-wing column. It's a scam. It's an intellectual scam conducted by very sly and capable people. And then his colleagues who see right away what he's doing and the value of it go, great book, path-breaking analysis, brilliant. And then the New York Review of Books writes a review, and then the History Channel makes a documentary, Michael Moore comes rolling in to make a movie, or Steven Spielberg puts him in a cameo role, and the bottom line of it is this now, the same fact is reverberated from A to B to C to Z, and people go, fascism's got to be on the right. Well, how do you know? Well, because, it was in Barnes & Noble, and I saw it on the History Channel, and I turned on NPR, and there it was, and I type into Wikipedia, and it says that. They don't realize it's the same bullet ricocheting from one wall to the other, coming back at them from different directions. They think this is independent corroboration of something that is, and was, a hoax from day one. So I actually want to talk today briefly about a couple of these relevant and significant hoaxes. And I want to begin with the hoax about the American founding. Now, you have to realize the purpose of the hoax. The purpose of the hoax here is very simple, that the left recognizes that virtually all the great, horrendous crimes of American history were perpetrated with the full complicity and support, if not initiation, of the Democratic Party. And this would apply to slavery, to segregation, to Jim Crow, to the Ku Klux Klan, to racial terrorism, to the internment of Japanese Americans, to opposition to the civil rights movement. All of this led by the Democratic Party. And the left knows this. But they don't want the Democratic Party to take the blame because they're members of it. They have to move the blame to somebody else. And so they have several candidates: the founders, America, the white man, the South. In every case, there's an attempt to shift the blame. And so there's an attempt to blame the founders for slavery and the dehumanization of blacks, even though the massive plantation system that dotted the American South had nothing to do with the founding. It didn't exist at the time of the founding. It was only Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin in 1793, after the founding, that led to the massive spread of, you may say, the cotton industry in the South. So it's the Democratic Party that became the party of the plantation, but now, looking back, they want to pin it on the founders. And so they rely on people's ignorance about what was actually going on to do that. And they'll say things like, well, the founders regarded blacks to be 3/5 of a human being. They had absolutely no sense of the value of African American life. Now, it takes a little bit of digging the context of the 3/5 debate to realize that this is actually a flat-out lie. In the debate between the North and the South, interestingly, the North wanted blacks to count for 0. And the South, the slavery side, you may say, wanted blacks to count for 1. So if you're actually looking at who's dehumanizing blacks, the North actually wanted blacks not to count at all. Why? Because this was a fight over political representation, i.e., which side gets more congressmen, which side gets more representatives. And the North wanted to weaken the political power of the South precisely so it could advance against slavery. So the anti-slavery side wanted blacks not to count. And the pro-slavery side, so-called, wanted blacks to count as a full human being. And the 3/5 was a compromise. So you can agree or disagree with the compromise, but the idea that the 3/5 clause somehow reflects the founders' assessment of African American life, total and complete nonsense. A calumny and lie against the founders, but with a political motive. And the political motive is shift the blame. Shift the blame. Now, this is also happening with the South. The reason you have, let's knock down all these Confederate monuments. Let's knock down Robert E. Lee's monument. Interestingly, Robert E. Lee was opposed to slavery, condemned it. Interestingly, Robert E. Lee was opposed to secession, condemned it. It was only when his state of Virginia decided against his recommendation to secede that he decided to fight in defense of his own family and his own neighbors and what he thought to be his higher loyalty. The typical Confederate soldier whose monument is typically knocked down was neither a slave owner nor a planter. Typical Confederate soldier owned no slaves. He was a dirt poor farmer or laborer. And when one of those guys was asked in the Civil War, why are you fighting? He goes, because the Yankees are down here, fighting in defense of the only life that he knew. In short, is this the bad guy of American slavery? Nonsense. So what's going on? Why is it really important to knock these statues down? Again, the key is to shift the blame away from somebody. Away from whom? Away from the Northern Democrats who drove this whole debate. See, the slavery debate was between the anti-slavery Republicans and the pro-slavery Democrats. But the pro-slavery Democrats were in the North and the South. Abraham Lincoln knew this. So here's Abraham Lincoln identifying, in his opinion, the 4 most malevolent figures in the country promoting slavery. He names them. Roger Taney, who wrote the Dred Scott decision. He's from Maryland. Actually, Lincoln counts him as a Southerner. And then Franklin Pierce, the former president. He's from New Hampshire, Northern Democrat. And then James Buchanan, the sitting president. He's from Pennsylvania, Northern Democrat. And then Stephen Douglas, he's from Illinois, Northern Democrat. So notice that out of the 4 bad guys, 3 are Northern Democrats. And there are huge statues to all these men standing right now in their home states. And no Antifa or Black Lives Matter guys have ever gone to those statues, defaced them, pulled them down. Why not? Because to do it is immediately to send the message that the slavery side was not Southern. It was actually the alliance between the Democrats in the South and the Democrats in the North. That fact has to be hidden, and therefore the knocking down of the Confederate statues pins the blame, the ideological blame, on the Southern side. I've said a couple things about slavery and racism, and I want to kind of turn to a big lie about fascism, because this is probably the most incendiary label that is flung around today all the time against our side, not just against Trump, but against conservatives, against Republicans, and so on. Now, interestingly, you notice that when people talk about fascism today, almost nobody can say what fascism actually is. Really hard to define it. People define it all kinds of ways, and I would argue this is actually deliberate because the left has muddied the definition of fascism in order to hide what it actually is. So let's look at what it actually is, and the way to see what it actually is to see how it started. How did we even get fascism? What does it mean? And when we think of fascism, by the way, we have to be a little careful, because today, when we look back through history, we go, World War II, gas chambers, and that came later. But the first fascist party in the world was Mussolini. The first fascist regime was Mussolini's, in Mussolini's Italy, and that was 1922, long before World War II. Even Hitler came to power in 1933, and his party was the largest elected party in Germany. So what I want to get at is, how did these guys get started? What was their appeal? Well, essentially, fascism arose out of what can be called the crisis of Marxism. So Marx had predicted in the 19th century that there were going to be massive clashes between the working class, the proletariat, and the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, and we were going to see communist overthrows of the government in countries like England and France and Germany, and it never happened. There was no working class revolt. In fact, there has never been a working class revolt against the capitalist class in any country, anywhere in the world to this day. So Marx was wrong. And all Marx's intelligent supporters knew he was wrong. But they tried to think why he's wrong. And Mussolini, who was a Marxist, he was the editor of the socialist magazine in Italy called Avanti, he scratches his head and he goes, I know why Marx is wrong. Marx is wrong because he only emphasizes class. In fact, Marx had said a working man has no country. The idea was that if you're a working guy in Britain or France, you'd have more in common across national lines than you would with your fellow countrymen. And Mussolini said, but I fought in World War II, and I noticed that the British socialists fought for Britain, and the French socialists fought for France, and the German socialists fought for Germany. Therefore, I conclude from this that in addition to class, there's a second and maybe more powerful force, and that force is nationalism, attachment to your country. So, says Mussolini, we need a new type of socialism that marries nationalism to socialism. Let's call it, you guessed it, National Socialism. So the origin of National Socialism was a desire to rescue the failed prophecies of Marx by creating a new marriage between attachment to one's country, nationalism, and socialist economics. And that's why Hitler, of course, called his party the National Socialist Party. That's why socialism is firmly on the left. And what I do, the kind of work I do, is I say, okay, let me now investigate all the founders of fascism in all the major countries, Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Italy, and so on. Turns out that without exception, they're all men of the left. And so this is how fascism got started. Now, we talk about history, and we should, but at the end of the day, the reason I'm doing this is I'm trying to relate this history to the present. I'm trying to ask this question: do we have a fascist streak in American politics today? Answer, yes, we do. Now the question is, where is it coming from? Given what we know about fascism, is this fascist streak on the right, or is it on the left? Now the left goes, it's obviously on the right. Look at Donald Trump. He's an authoritarian. Really? How is Trump an authoritarian? He's flayed on every medium, every comedian, every time there's an Emmy. It's not just the news. He's flayed on all platforms 24 hours a day. Now, if Donald Trump were really Mussolini, he would send over some goons. They would find Acosta, that overgrown infant. They'd beat him to a pulp and lock him up. But Trump doesn't do that. Trump basically fires back. I think I read a kind of a funny thing from a Hollywood actor. She goes, you know, he beat the hell out of me on Twitter. On Twitter. Real fascists beat the hell out of you, period. And then people say, well, Trump is obviously a fascist because he's a nationalist. And this is actually a very cunning allegation because it is true. Hitler was a nationalist. So was Mussolini. But interestingly, nationalism is on the left and the right. My countryman Gandhi was a nationalist. Mandela was a nationalist in South Africa. Winston Churchill was a nationalist. So was de Gaulle. Abraham Lincoln was a nationalist. So clearly, nationalism does not equal fascism. What makes fascism is the peculiar marriage between nationalism and socialism. You need both ingredients, just like you need hydrogen and oxygen to make water. You need nationalism and socialism to make fascism. And the left hides that fact. The reason I see fascism or streaks of fascism on the left is who are the people who are intimidating their dissenters on campus? Who are the people who are using the weapons of the state against their political opponents? Who are the people who are trying to use the centralized state to control not only the economy, but the private lives of citizens? Well, this is not coming from the right. It's coming totally from the left. Now, the question I want to ask is, how do we today, conservatives, respond to this? It seems to me, again, that the old tactics are a little insufficient because, number one, the first thing we need to do is we actually need a broader comprehension of fake history and fake scholarship than we normally do. We have to realize that even things that we, quote, know because they've been taught to us that seem, quote, obvious, require investigation. Did the two parties really switch sides? It's not obvious. You have to check. Did the racist Dixiecrats become Republicans? Actually, no. The reason I like to do this in a book and a movie both is a book is one thing. It lays out an argument. But the advantage of a movie is you can see it for yourself. And so in Death of a Nation, I put up the names and photos of all the racist Dixiecrats. There they are, 150 of them. That's the group. These are the people who joined the Dixiecrat Party. These are the people who voted against the Civil Rights Act. Now, let's count to see how many became Republicans. And the count exists. And the beauty of living today is young people can check it out. Pull out your phone. Look up Dixiecrats. Look at their names. Count who moved, who switched over. And apart from Watson, Albert Watson in the House, and Strom Thurmond in the Senate, all the other racist Dixiecrats lived and died in the Democratic Party. They're lionized in the Democratic Party to this day. There are buildings right here. Debbie and I walked by them yesterday in Washington, D.C., named after those scoundrels. So this is, again, fake narrative, fake history. You have to be more alert to that stuff now. And the payoff of it is great, because if you are alert to it, you become what I call a very dangerous American. When you walk around, you're essentially an intellectual time bomb. And other people, you'll realize, don't like to talk to you because it leaves them with massive egg on their face. In the last two talks I gave for Young America's Foundation, in the first one, a guy stands up right as I start speaking and just starts shouting the F word and doesn't stop for about 10 minutes. And I tried to invite him to have a discussion, but I realized he doesn't want to have a discussion. He knows that if he got into a discussion, this would not go well. This would be a debate with like one hand clapping. He knew that. So his idea was to try to shut down the event, to make me leave, to make the college cancel it. And this is the left's tactic now, because when faced with incendiary facts, they don't have very much. They want to shut you down. The important thing to this is that we should never let them do that, because from Antifa's point of view, if they are able to intimidate a speaker, chase him off the platform, if they're able to create enough chaos, the college cancels the event, they've won. They mark that check, victory. A few years ago, Condoleezza Rice was offered a graduation speaking spot at Rutgers University in New Jersey. There was a ruckus. Some students go, "There's no way she's going to set foot on our campus." And Condoleezza Rice, kind of, you could call this the old Reagan Bush style, goes, "Well, I really don't want to be a problem. I really don't want to speak if they don't want me to speak. I will, dignified and ladylike, withdraw from the event." And some people will go, "What a magnificent display of good manners and noblesse oblige." But that is not, in fact, my view. My view is that this is a disgraceful abdication by someone who should know better. Why? Because if Condoleezza Rice withdraws, and if they can stop her from speaking on the campus, no conservative will ever set foot on that campus again. If she's not acceptable, who is? So the point is, it's really important to deny the left their ability to shut us up. And that's where you come in. And I recognize it requires an exceptional amount of strength on your part, because a student is always, quote, on the receiving end in a campus. Your professors have control over your grades. Your administration has control over your life. You're, in a sense, a little vulnerable. And this brings me to the second virtue that's very important. In addition to knowledge, that's the first one. The second one is courage, bravery. And here I have to say, you can actually take a lesson from Donald Trump. In my opinion, Trump, for all his weaknesses, and he has weaknesses, but ironically, in today's political environment, his weaknesses are political strengths. Here's what I mean. Trump has a human weakness, which is that if you attack him, no matter how irrelevant or picayune you are, he has an emotional need to attack you back. He has to do it. And normally that's not a virtue, right? Your parents didn't teach you to be that way. Your parents taught you to have self-control, pick your fights. But I'll tell you, we've had a Republican Party that for 25 years has been largely populated by invertebrates. And when challenged, they hide. They go under the desk. And so in this environment, what would normally be a political vice is on our side a necessary virtue, which is to say the need to punch back. When Romney was nominated, and Romney is a good guy. He's in a tradition of good guys that Republicans have nominated one after the other. Bob Dole, John McCain, Mitt Romney. And yet when Romney steps into the arena, he gets pummeled. The left turns him into Lucifer in 5 minutes. It's the media and its power to humiliate. You're a thief, Romney. The reason you're living well is that you've taken money from other people. You're ripping off the working class. You're greedy, you're selfish. And Romney is explaining on the defensive, up against the wall. Now notice that this doesn't happen with Trump. You can't accuse Trump. You have way too much money. Trump actually has more money than Romney. But you can't go, hey, Trump, you got too much money, because if you do, he sits you down and explains he has more money than you thought. It totally doesn't work with this guy. He has created a certain kind of, almost you may say, Republican immunity, because, see, the left loves to hit our side with the hypocrisy card. I mean, these people are the most demented, ruthless perverts you will find on the planet. But they go, we don't care about that, that's good. But if we can find a Republican and pin some peccadillo or sin on him, it's going to be great, because the Republicans are the party of virtue. So we'll get them. And we'll get the Republicans to knife their own guy, which nothing could be more delightful than that. This, by the way, is why most Republicans are terrified of the media. They know the media can do this, that there's a double standard entrenched. But again, it totally doesn't work with Trump. Because the left goes, okay, fine, we can't get him on Russia collusion. Stormy Daniels. We got him, Stormy Daniels. Republicans are the party of virtue. They're never going to put up with this. And so they go to Trump. Check this out, Stormy Daniels. Here's Trump. What else you got? So Trump is basically a guy, flawed from a human point of view, Himalayan ego, but he is redeemed, in my view, by his extraordinary political bravery. Debbie and I were at the Texas rally. Here's the media sitting right in front of you. And most Republicans are, terrified of the media. Trump attacks them openly, straight out. Now, in this, he's even different than Reagan. Reagan went above the heads of the media. Reagan was above the fray. Trump is in the fray. But by being in the fray, he unnerves his opponents in a way that I haven't actually seen any Republican do. Look at the way he's unnerved Elizabeth Warren. Look at the way he's unnerved Maxine Waters. Now, I agree, Trump's rhetoric is incendiary. He goes, Maxine Waters is the stupidest person in America. Extremely high IQ individual, extremely low IQ individual. But the reason he unnerves them is that, Elizabeth Warren runs to get her DNA test to prove that, wow, she really is, 1/1000 Native American. I wouldn't be surprised if right now Maxine Waters is taking an IQ test. Pretty soon she'll be revealing, wow, I'm in the 9th percentile. Only 91% of Americans are smarter than me. I'm not, in fact, the stupidest American. This is how Trump has the ability to get into people's heads and make them crazy. And this aspect of Trump I recommend to you. You have to learn how to make the other side crazy. And you have to make them crazy because if you don't make them crazy, they have the disproportion of the power. And by and large, they're pretty much determined to use it against you. So you can, if you're on the defensive, constantly letting them set the agenda, it's going to be a tough life for you. You're going to essentially be living the life of, you may say, the person in hiding. And you have to figure out, your space to move is extremely limited. The culture controls you and not the other way around. So the question you have to ask is, how do I change that? And how do I change that is a way of thinking creatively about what needs to be done Like, what do we not have on our side that the other side has in spades? I'll tell you one thing, and then I'll open the door to questions. One thing they have is they have all the comedians. They have Colbert, they have Bill Maher, they have Jon Stewart, they have John Oliver, and they have Ellen, and down the list it goes. Now, you know how important that is, because the comedians set, if you will, the tone of what it means, not only to be funny, but to be cool. So I say, how do we get comedians? Turns out it's not easy. Why? Because to be a comedian, if you want to be Bill Maher, well, this guy went to the LA Improv, and he was like the Beatles, 8 days a week. He cut his teeth there, he practiced, he improved, he got better. So our side needs to create a way for that to happen. Young People's Comedy Channel, where young people can do stand-up, can do variety shows, can explore with that vein of creativity that is present on our side but is suppressed because it has no outlet right now. It has no place to go. If you're a really funny young guy, there's no improv that's inviting you. HBO's not going to give you a stand-up show. You're stuck. So we have to break that. The reason, for many years, from the 80s all the way through the 90s, conservatives were complaining about media bias. The media is extremely biased. The cable channels are on one side. And all these studies that document media bias, important, but insufficient. Why? Because if that premise is true, that the media is biased and is only serving half the population, it follows as night follows day that there should be room for a media outlet that serves the other half. Enter the Fox News channel, which currently is not only the most influential cable channel, but the most profitable. Makes $1 billion of profit a year, based upon the idea that you don't just complain about the bias on the other side, you do something to counter it on our side. In our own small way, we make documentaries. People go, wow, Dinesh, this is fantastic, you're making documentaries. I go, documentaries aren't that hard. Michael Moore makes documentaries. How stupid is that guy? If he can do it. And remember that in Hollywood, the most important guy is not Michael Moore. It's Steven Spielberg. The most powerful way Hollywood sends its messages is through feature films. So I say to myself, if I really want to up the ante, if I want to do what Fox does in the media, I got to go make feature films. I got to make romantic comedies and thrillers and animated family films. Why? Because that's where the most powerful messages are transmitted on a daily basis by the other side, and we have almost nothing to counter it on our side. So be an entrepreneur of ideas, be creative, learn your stuff, and be brave. In some ways, being an activist is a little bit thankless. There's an old Tibetan saying, after crossing the mountain, more mountains. And I think we see this. We see this right now going on in Florida. We thought we won the race. Ballots have magically appeared. This is the left. You have to fight them, and once you beat them, you have to fight them again. In other words, you have to wrestle them to the ground and hold them there. It's going to take a new Republican Party. Just as in 1860, Lincoln had to stiffen the spine of the Republican Party for the difficult days ahead. No, I'm not saying we're headed for a civil war, but I am saying that the situations of now in 1860, not dissimilar. The low-grade political violence that we see now was there in the 1850s. A congressman, Preston Brooks, goes into a Republican senator, Charles Sumner's office, and beats him with a cane. I can see that happening today. But it never happened in the interim between the 1850s and today. So it's a troubling time, not the ideal time. This is not a time I think Reagan would have enjoyed. Reagan would be a fish out of water. The waters are really roiled right now. But the one guy who would not be a fish out of water, who would understand completely what the other side is up to, is Abraham Lincoln, because the waters were even more roiled when he was there. And so let's learn to have conservative principles, but apply them in our new situation. We need a conservatism for roiled waters. And the question is, are we up to the task? I pray that we are. Being up to the task is the way to achieve what Reagan dreamed about when he called for, in his beautiful words, morning in America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, if you guys want to do questions, go ahead and start lining